Did you know that the average person is told between 10 and 200 lies every single day? Now, most of those are little white lies. Social lubricants to keep the gears of society from grinding to a halt. That's a beautiful sweater. Sorry, I have plans that night. But what about the other ones? The ones that matter. The ones that can cost you your savings, your trust, or even your safety. For 40 years, I sat across from people in small, windowless rooms and learned the difference. My name is Arthur Hayes. I'm a retired private detective, and I made my living not by listening to what people said, but by understanding what they meant. The truth is, every single person you meet is broadcasting a story. The question is whether you're tuned to the right frequency to receive it. Hollywood and television have sold you a bill of goods. They show you a twitchy-eyed suspect who sweats under a single lamp and confesses everything inside of 5 minutes. That's a fantasy. Real deception is subtle, it's confident, and it often comes from the people you'd least expect. Let me tell you about a case. A nice older woman, Eleanor, was convinced by a charming young man to invest her entire retirement fund into a can't-miss real estate opportunity. He had a firm handshake, looked her right in the eye, and had an answer for every question. On paper, he was perfect. Her family brought me in when the checks stopped arriving. When I finally sat down with this fellow, he didn't twitch, he didn't sweat. He was the picture of calm, but his behavior told a different story. Not in the big, cinematic ways you'd think. It was in the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. It was in the way he used distancing language, always saying the fund or the investment. Never my fund or our investment. He was verbally separating himself from the crime as he was committing it. Behavior reveals intent. Every gesture, every pause, every choice of words is a breadcrumb leading back to the truth. This isn't about becoming a human lie detector to win arguments at the dinner table. This is a survival skill. Think about the last time you negotiated for a car. The salesman says, "This is the best price I can give you." But is he leaning in engaged? Or is he leaning back, arms crossed, creating a physical barrier between you and him? That's not just a posture, it's a signal. Psychology gives us a simple explanation for this. The limbic system. It's the primitive, emotional part of our brain, and it reacts to stimuli like the stress of telling a high-stakes lie long before our conscious, rational brain can cook up a convincing story. This system controls things we don't consciously direct, our heart rate, our breathing, and those fleeting, unconscious flashes of emotion on our face. Your body doesn't know how to lie. The trick is learning to read the language it's speaking. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that you couldn't explain? A sense that something was just off? That was likely your own mind picking up on these nonverbal cues without you even realizing it. The goal here is to move that process from the gut to the conscious mind. Most people think they have a good poker face. They're wrong. They might be able to control their mouth or their posture, but the face is a traitor to their intentions. For a fraction of a second, the truth will flash across it, and if you're trained to see it, it's as clear as a headline in the morning paper. We're talking about micro-expressions. These are tiny, involuntary muscle contractions that reveal a person's true emotion. They last for about 1/25 of a second, a literal blink of an eye moment. The pioneering work of Dr. Paul Ekman identified 7 of these that are universal across every culture on earth: anger, fear, surprise, disgust, contempt, happiness, and sadness. It doesn't matter if you were raised in a penthouse in Manhattan or a village in the Amazon rainforest, your face will betray disgust in the exact same way. This isn't learned behavior. It's hardwired into our DNA. It's an ancient, preverbal communication system. I remember a corporate case, a partnership dispute. 2 founders, old friends, were at each other's throats, accusing one another of trying to steal a proprietary algorithm. I sat with one of them, let's call him David. He spoke about his partner, Mark, with what sounded like deep sadness and regret. His words were, "It breaks my heart that Mark would think I could do this to him after all we've been through." But as he said the name Mark, for just a single frame of reality, his upper lip on one side curled ever so slightly. That's it. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But it wasn't sadness. It was contempt. In that one micro-expression, I saw the entire story. The sadness was a performance for my benefit. The contempt was the truth. That's what we built the rest of the investigation on, and sure enough, we found David had been setting up a shell corporation to siphon the profits. You can practice this yourself. Put on a political talk show, it doesn't matter which side. Turn off the sound. Watch the interviewer's face when the guest is answering a question. Don't look for the big, obvious nods or smiles. Look for the flash, the flicker of an expression that doesn't match the polite, professional mask. You'll see a flash of anger when they hear a talking point they disagree with, or a flicker of surprise when the guest says something unexpected. Why does this happen? Again, it's the brain. The neocortex is the logical part of your brain. It's the part that's telling the lie. But the limbic system, our emotional core, hears the lie and goes, nope, that's not right. It sends a signal to the facial muscles, which contract involuntarily. The neocortex then immediately sends a counter signal saying, mask that. Get back to the script. But it's too late. The truth, for that 1/25th of a second, has already escaped. Have you ever been complimented by someone, but the feeling you got was the opposite of warmth? What do you think you saw on their face in that first split second? If the face is where the truth escapes, the body is where the story of that truth is written. But amateurs make a critical mistake here. They look for one single tell. They read a book that says, liars don't make eye contact, or people who cross their arms are being defensive, and they treat it like gospel. That's a fool's game, and it will lead you down the wrong path 9 times out of 10. The most important thing, the absolute foundation of reading body language, is establishing a baseline. A baseline is how a person behaves when they are relaxed, comfortable, and not under any stress. Before you can spot a deviation, you have to know what they're deviating from. Some people are naturally fidgety. Some people naturally avoid eye contact. Some people always cross their arms because they're cold or it's just comfortable for them. To label that as deception without context is malpractice. I was once consulted on an internal theft case at a small accounting firm. The prime suspect was a woman named Margaret. When the partners interviewed her, she was a wreck. She couldn't sit still, her hands were trembling, she was tapping her foot, and she could barely look them in the eye. They were convinced she was guilty. They brought me in to get the confession. I sat down with Margaret, and for the first 20 minutes, I didn't ask her a single question about the missing money. I asked about her kids. I asked about the pictures on her desk. I asked about her weekend plans. And you know what? Her behavior didn't change. She fidgeted, tapped her foot, and looked all around the room. This was her baseline. Her normal behavior under even mild social pressure was what others were misinterpreting as guilt. The real deviation came later, when I finally asked a specific question about the accounting ledgers for a particular date. She went perfectly still. The foot tapping stopped. Her hands froze on the table. She looked me dead in the eye. That was the anomaly. That was the signal. Her comfort zone was anxiety. Her sign of deception was a sudden, focused calm. You need to become an observer of people in their natural habitats. At your next meeting at work, don't just listen to the discussion. Watch. How does your boss sit when he's listening versus when he's talking? What does your coworker do with her hands when she's confident about a point versus when she's unsure? This is intelligence gathering. The science behind this is about cognitive load. When we're telling the truth, our brain doesn't have to work very hard. The story is already there. We can gesture naturally, relax, and focus on the conversation. But when we're creating a lie, our brain is working overtime. It's inventing the story, checking it for consistency, monitoring the other person's reaction, and trying to remember what it said 5 minutes ago. With all that mental energy going into the lie, there's less available for controlling the body. So, you see either a complete shutdown of normal movement like with Margaret, or pacifying behaviors, like rubbing one's neck, stroking an arm, or adjusting clothing. These are unconscious attempts by the body to soothe the anxiety the brain is creating. Think about someone you know very well. What's a unique quirk or gesture they have when they're relaxed? How does that change when they get stressed or excited? Words are only half the conversation. A good interrogator, or a good observer of human nature, learns to listen to the music of a conversation, not just the lyrics. The pitch, pace, and tone of someone's voice can tell you more than the dictionary definitions of the words they're using. We all have a normal vocal range where we're comfortable. When stress is introduced, the stress of deception, fear, or excitement, it has a direct physiological effect on the vocal cords. They tighten, and when they tighten, the pitch of the voice tends to rise. It's often not a dramatic squeak, but a subtle upward shift that you can feel more than you can consciously identify. The opposite can also be true. Some people, in an attempt to control themselves and appear calm, will artificially lower their voice, resulting in a monotone or flat delivery that sounds unnatural. I worked on an insurance fraud case once. A man claimed his classic car, a prized possession, had been stolen from his garage. He sat in his living room, telling the story to me and the insurance adjuster. His words were perfect. He described his devastation, his love for the car, the violation he felt. He almost had me. But there was one problem. Every time he mentioned the car itself, that beautiful '67 Mustang, his voice became richer, more resonant, almost loving. But every time he mentioned the theft when they broke in, the empty space, his voice became flat, thin, and lifeless. The emotion was attached to the object, not the loss. It was a complete vocal reversal of what you'd expect. The story his mouth was telling was one of a victim. The story his voice was telling was of someone who was detached from the event he was describing. We eventually found the stolen car hidden in his brother-in-law's barn, waiting for the insurance money to come through before being miraculously recovered. Pay attention to language patterns as well. Deceivers often use conversational stalls to give their brain time to invent the next part of the lie. This can manifest as repeating the question you just asked. You ask, "Where were you last night?" And they respond, "Where was I last night?" Well, that's not a conversation, that's a brain buffering. Another tell is the use of qualifiers and hedging language. A truthful person will say, "I left the office at 5 o'clock. A deceptive person might say, "If I recall correctly, I think it was probably around 5 o'clock. Give or take. They are creating distance from the statement, giving themselves an out. It's a verbal escape hatch. Here's a practical exercise. The next time you call a customer service line and get routed to a call center, listen to the agent's script. Listen to the unnatural pauses, the forced enthusiasm, the perfectly even pacing. That is what a voice sounds like when it's not connected to genuine belief. It's a performance. Now, have you ever noticed your own voice changing when you're uncomfortable? Do you start talking faster, or does your speech slow down as you search for the right words? That self-awareness is the first step to recognizing it in others. All right, let's move beyond a single gesture or a vocal tic. Those are clues, but they aren't the whole case. The real art is putting them together, but to do that effectively, you need to apply a little pressure. Not a hammer, mind you. You're not trying to break someone in a back room. This is a delicate instrument. In a normal, everyday conversation, you can apply a gentle, calibrated pressure test to see how someone reacts when you knock them off their script. People who are lying have a prepackaged narrative. They've rehearsed it. They know the beginning, the middle, and the end. Their comfort zone is within the confines of that story. The pressure test works by asking a question that is adjacent to their story, but that they haven't prepared for, a question they have no reason to lie about, but that a truthful person could answer instantly. Let me give you a classic example from my early days. A teenager was brought in for joyriding. He had a perfect alibi. He was at his friend Kevin's house all night playing video games. He had the timeline down, the games they played, everything. He was cool as a cucumber. I let him tell the whole story without interruption. I nodded, seemed to accept it. Then I leaned forward and asked, very casually, "Did Kevin's mom make you guys snacks?" He blinked. A tiny hesitation. Yeah, she did. I smiled. Great. What kind of couch does Kevin have in his living room? Is it leather or fabric? The panic was immediate. Not a big, dramatic panic, but you could see the gears grinding in his head. It's a simple, trivial detail. If he was there, he'd know without thinking. But since he wasn't, his brain had to suddenly invent a new piece of the set. A detail that wasn't in the original script. The lie wasn't in his answer, it was in the hesitation. This is a tool you must use with extreme caution. It's not for trapping your spouse or friends in minor social fibs. That's how you end up alone. But it's a powerful tool in a situation where the stakes are high. Let's say a contractor is giving you a story about why the project is delayed, blaming supply chain issues. You've listened to the whole explanation. You don't accuse, you don't argue. You simply ask an unexpected, verifiable, neutral question. I see. When your supplier called you about the delay, were you in your truck or at the office? I might have been trying to reach you around the same time. A truthful person will access that memory instantly. Oh, I was in the truck, on my way to the lumber yard. A deceptive person has to run a quick calculation. Where does he think I was? What's the safest answer? That calculation takes time. Have you ever been in a conversation where a simple, unexpected question seemed to completely derail the other person? What was it about that question that threw them off their rhythm? The key is that the pressure doesn't come from the accusation in your voice, but from the quiet confidence of your unexpected question. Now we assemble the pieces. You've observed the facial flickers. You've established a baseline for their body. You've listened to the music of their voice, and maybe you've even applied a gentle pressure test. The next level is to step back and create a psychological profile, not of a criminal, but of the person in front of you. This isn't about putting them on a couch, it's about understanding their world. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to read someone in a vacuum. You have to understand the context, the environment, and most importantly, what I call the echo chamber. Everyone builds an echo chamber around themselves. They surround themselves with employees, friends, or family who reflect their own worldview back at them. Reading a powerful CEO in his own boardroom, where everyone defers to him, will give you a completely different set of signals than reading that same man at a parent-teacher conference for his struggling child. I once investigated a prominent community leader, a man beloved by everyone, who was suspected of running a charity scam. I interviewed a dozen of his employees, board members, and friends. To a person, they said he was a living saint, honest, generous, incapable of deceit. In his world, in his echo chamber, he was flawless. If I had stopped there, the case would have been closed. But a profile isn't built from testimonials. I started looking at him outside that curated environment. I pulled credit card receipts. He was a man who preached fiscal responsibility, but was spending thousands at high-end restaurants he didn't publicize. I observed him from a distance at a casual social event. The warm, engaging smile he had at charity galas was gone, replaced by a look of bored arrogance. We build our profile not just from how people act, but from the inconsistencies between how they act in different environments. The truth is often found in the space between the private self and the public mask. This has immediate practical applications for you. Let's say you're going into a critical business negotiation. You've researched the company, the financials, the market data. That's fine. But have you researched the person? Look at their professional profile online. What articles do they share? What accomplishments do they highlight? This tells you what they value, what their professional ego is tied to. Now, if you can, look at their personal social media. What are their hobbies? Are they family-oriented? Do they travel? You're not being a stalker, you're building a multi-dimensional profile. You might learn that the ruthless corporate negotiator you've been dreading is also a dedicated bird watcher. That seemingly irrelevant piece of data can give you a way to connect with them on a human level, to briefly pull them out of their professional echo chamber and create a moment of genuine rapport. Do you present the same version of yourself to your boss as you do to your best friend? If not, which of those versions is closer to the person you truly are? And what does that gap between them say about your own life? Understanding this in yourself is the key to seeing it in others. So, how do we bring all of this out of the interrogation room and into your daily life? This isn't about turning every conversation into an investigation. That's a miserable way to live. This is about elevating your awareness, about protecting yourself, and about communicating more effectively. It's a tool, and like any tool, its value is in its application. Let's take a common scenario, a job interview. You're sitting across from the hiring manager. This is a perfect place to practice. First, establish a baseline. The first few minutes will be small talk. Did you find the place okay? How about this weather? Pay attention. How do they sit? What's their normal rate of speech? What's their resting facial expression? This is your control group. Now, when you start answering the tough questions, watch for deviations. When you talk about your greatest strength, Do they lean in, showing interest? Or does a flicker of a micro-expression, maybe skepticism or boredom, flash across their face? When they tell you about the company culture, are their gestures open and inclusive? Or are their hands hidden under the table, their posture closed off? You're gathering data that goes far beyond the words being exchanged, helping you spot red flags before you accept an offer. Let's talk about relationships, whether it's a new date or a lifelong partner. We often hear what we want to hear. These skills force you to see what is actually there. When your date tells you about their amazing relationship with their ex, do they say it with a genuine smile, or is there a flash of anger or contempt? That little signal tells you there's unresolved conflict there. When your partner says, everything's fine, but their body language is a complete contradiction, arms crossed, no eye contact, shoulders tensed up, the body is telling the truth. The key is not to pounce and say, ah. Your body language says you're lying. That's aggressive and counterproductive. The skill is in using that observation to ask a better question. Instead of accepting everything's fine, you can say, it seems like something's on your mind. I'm here to listen if you want to talk about it. You're using the nonverbal cue not as an accusation, but as an invitation to a more honest conversation. Even in business meetings, this is a game changer. You're in a negotiation and the other party says, this is our final offer. You can use profiling and context. You know from your research that they are under pressure to close the deal by the end of the quarter. You notice that while their words are firm, their body language is showing signs of stress, a leg jiggling under the table, repeated throat clearing. The cluster of verbal and nonverbal signals suggests their final offer might have more flexibility than they're letting on. This isn't a license to be a bully, it's information that empowers you to confidently and calmly push back just a little bit more. Think about a recent important conversation you had. Can you recall any nonverbal signals from the other person that, in hindsight, might have been more important than their words? Learning this language is like going from seeing the world in black and white to seeing it in full, vivid color. The details were always there, you just didn't have the eyes to see them. At the end of the day, these techniques are not about uncovering some grand conspiracy in your daily life. They are about seeing reality more clearly. They are about peeling back the layers of performance and social masks that we all wear. To get to the core of intent, it is a defensive skill. It protects you from the charming fraudster, the untrustworthy business partner, and the salesman who doesn't have your best interests at heart. But it is also a skill of connection. By truly understanding what someone is communicating beyond their words, you can respond to their real needs, their real anxieties, and their real joys. You can become a better parent, a better partner, and a better leader. You move from simply hearing people to truly understanding them. The human animal is a broadcasting station, constantly sending out signals. The skills we've discussed today are simply the antenna you use to tune in. But I'll leave you with a word of caution, the most important advice I can give. Once you start seeing these things, you can't unsee them. The world becomes a more transparent, and sometimes more disappointing, place. You will see the lie behind the politician's smile. You will see the envy in a friend's compliment. You will see the fear in a boss's bravado. The power of this knowledge comes with the responsibility of wisdom. You must learn what to act on and what to let go. Not every small deception warrants a confrontation. Sometimes, understanding the reason for the lie, insecurity, fear, social pressure, is more important than calling it out. Use this knowledge to protect yourself, but also to build bridges of empathy, not walls of suspicion. So here is your challenge. I don't want you to just watch this and forget it. I want you to practice. In your very next conversation today with a cashier, a co-worker, a family member, pick one thing to focus on. Just one. Maybe it's establishing a baseline. Maybe it's looking for hand gestures. Maybe it's just listening to the tone of their voice. Pay attention. Be a student of human nature. Don't judge, just observe. Then, come back here and share your results in the comments. Tell me what you saw. Tell me about the situations you want me to analyze next. Because this is a skill, and like any skill, it only grows sharper with practice. Subscribe for more secrets from my 40 years in the business of truth. Now go out there and start listening with your eyes.